Okay, hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the Parish Art Museum and Happy New Year. It's great to see so many of you here. Hi. My name is Corinne Ernie. I'm the Deputy Director of Curatorial Affairs here at the parish, and I'm very delighted and excited to introduce the two speakers for the conversation today, Mel Kendrick and Carroll Dunham. And this is in conjunction with the current exhibition, Mel Kendrick, Seeing Things in Things, which I hope you've all seen or you're going to see after the talk, and it's going to be up until February 19th. So before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors who make these programs possible, Weill Cornell Medicine in Southampton and the Corcoran Group. So at first sight, you wouldn't think that these two artists have a lot in common, but Mel and Tip are actually longtime friends, and also both of them are former studio assistants to Dorothea Rockburn. So today they will talk about their friendship, about the art, and who knows what else. So let me introduce both artists. Carroll Dunham is a contemporary American painter whose career has encompassed elements of abstract expressionism, surrealism, and neo-expressionism, moving from abstraction to figuration. Dunham has held global solo exhibitions at Museum Ludwig, Cologne, Mills Garden, Stockholm, and Drammens Museum in Norway, followed by a mid-career retrospective at the New Museum of Contemporary Art. His work is held in numerous esteemed collections, including the Art Institute of Chicago, the Brooklyn Museum, MoMA, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, Philadelphia Museum of Art, Walker Art Center, and the Whitney, among many others. Mel Kendrick, his sculptures have drawn widespread critical acclaim throughout his career. He is a 3-time recipient of a National Endowment of the Arts Fellowship and received both the Francis J. Greenberger Award and the American Academy of Arts and Letters Academy Award. Kendrick's work is represented in the collections of leading museums across the US, including MoMA, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, the Walker Art Center, Minneapolis, Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, and of course the parish. International venues include the Australian National Gallery in Canberra, the Centro Cultural Arte Contemporáneo Mexico City, and the Daimler Kunstsammlung in Berlin. So please give it away for Mel and Tip. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne. Mel and I have an unusual situation in our friendship, which is that we actually are really old friends, like older friends than just about anybody. We've known each other since we were 14. And my wife said to me, I think Mel and I both tend to underplay this because it's sort of, okay, whatever, you went to high school together. But my wife was saying to me when we were driving out here, people don't just want to hear him talk about, how he builds things. They want to hear about your life. So I'm putting this right up front that this gentleman and I go way back. We actually were in art classes together when we were 16, 17 years old. I don't think either of us imagined this, if we imagined anything. But it is interesting, and I do want to ask you, actually. I've watched you continuously since you were a kid, and now we see the fruits of all this, your grown-up activities out here. But is there, having done this exhibition and the previous version of it, do you find yourself thinking that there's a through line to all this? You were a 16-year-old kid who liked to take photographs. Now you're a man in his early mid-70s who still likes to make sculpture. So is there anything continuous here that you can talk about?
Well, there must be. Now I have to figure it out so I can talk about it. But we clearly were both really, well, that was sort of, we found our place in high school in the arts, in photography mostly. The continuum, did I think I was going to make sculpture? I don't know. I mean, each chapter, was different. College and then moving to New York City, and the standard things, like as you said, nobody knows what they're going to make, and in fact, you might very well, if you had seen it as a younger person, you probably wouldn't like it at all. You wouldn't even know why. You wouldn't understand it. So there's a big gulf there. I mean, you've traveled a long way, and I'd be hard put to find a universal, connection. Although putting together a show like this, things seemed to connect in a more linear way than perhaps I thought they had. But
within the time you've made sculpture?
Within the time I've made sculpture. So that's a very, finite. If we met in, I don't know, 1963 or something.
Something like that.
Something like that. And this show starts in 1982. And so there's a lot going on in between.
It's interesting to me thinking about it as it applies to Mel, because we did have a lot of the same early influences. I mean, I don't mean, you can't even call them art influences, like teenage experiences, came of age at the same time in the same basic precinct of the culture, had a lot of the same interests and enthusiasms, but I didn't end up making big wooden sculptures, and so I've always known that that was something you did, that I told my wife I'm just going to ask him what his favorite tools are and get him to talk for an hour about tools. Because I'm sure there hasn't been a lecture like that here. But we're not going to do that. But it's that kind of thing, like the kind of space that you had around you, the kind of things that you were drawn to. In hindsight, it kind of all leads here.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a real differentiation between our work even back then and what you were interested in and what I was, even though we were, weaving in and out of each other's lives. And I think that I've always been much more involved with, not that you weren't, but it's the physical world, how things go together, how things work, and almost
mechanical.
Yeah, mechanical, almost to a detriment, because I could easily disappear into aspects, whatever, fixing up lofts to begin with in New York, or just the mundane. Doing all that stuff myself was, and fixing things. I
felt natural.
Felt natural, yeah. I don't know why I'm thinking of this now, but you talk about that. I do remember, and I think Laurie was there. We were in an elevator going up to Casey Kaplan, what's his name's show? On West Broadway, and
the gallery used to be there, yeah.
Yeah, and the elevator got stuck. And it was packed. There were babies, there's everybody going up there. And I sort of looked around because Mary, my wife, wasn't there. But I still said, does anybody mind if I go on the roof of the elevator? Because I pictured people being, no, don't panicking. But no, I mean, so they didn't seem to mind. So I went on the roof. I turned the thing off. I opened the door to the next floor, and everybody climbed out the top of the elevator. Actually, into Vincent Longo's loft, who used to be my teacher at Hunter. But anyway,
most artists would not have had that thought. I believe.
Yeah, but that's just somehow through all that understanding how things work. I took and sometimes it helped. So yeah. But anyway, that is my notion of the relationship to the physical world. I don't know how to break it down, but if you come right up to my more recent sculpture, everything is still about that kind of fixing, repairing, balancing.
Yeah, that's what I had that same thought, that it's that there is that almost purposely ruining things and then repairing them is a way that you could look at a huge amount of what you've made.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I like the way you say ruin. I wasn't, I didn't really think of it that way, but yes, it's like, and it's like things that I've made become my own found objects. I don't have to go outside to find these things, and yeah, so yeah, repair. It's almost an aesthetic.
Do you think that's something that we got handed generationally? I mean, we were both living in New York City in the early 1970s. You were in grad school, I wasn't, but we were picking up a lot of the same stuff that was in the air. You think that that aesthetic of repair is in any way related to that?
I don't know. I've thought about this and I can't find an exact correlation. I think that it's kind of a New England-y thing, if I'd say so. I mean, my family had no involvement in art whatsoever. They didn't understand it. We didn't go to art museums. We didn't do anything. But there was still this idea of doing things yourself all the time. And
self-reliance?
Self-reliance, yeah, definitely. And I believe actually since, well, I'll just go with that for a second, since obviously my family could not understand what I was doing when I decided, to follow this up. But they really understood the fact that I could build things. I could build lofts. I could do, there's more interest in that than in this thing called art. And so, so in a funny way, that would get me off course to some degree, because art's hard. It's hard because you have to figure out why you want to do it, what you're doing, come up with your own reason, whereas, building something, making a building stand or something is very practical. So it's hard to be practical in art when you're not making a practical object.
Yeah, the two things are antithetical. See, I feel like it may not be as, I guess it's clear in the show. This exhibition, this version of the exhibition doesn't obey a chronology in quite the way that the installation at the previous venue did. So one might not be reading Mel's work within its own history in quite the same way, which I think is a great aspect of the installation. But there was a point, and you talk about it in the catalog, you've talked about it a bunch, where you made this decision for things to become sort of verticalized. And up until that point, because that really wasn't the sensibility of sculpture that we were being exposed to, at least not verticality for its own sake, maybe verticality in the sense that Carl Andres stacked a bunch of bricks on top of each other or something, but the idea of building up as a way to enter sculptural space wasn't really, that wasn't within the discourse that I recall.
No, that was, it's funny you say verticality, because that's certainly part of it. I've always thought of it as in terms of objects, to acknowledge that you're making objects instead of situations, so that an object can be placed somewhere and you can move around it and see it from different directions.
And do you feel like the paradigmatic idea of a sculpture that you were presented with as a young artist was a situation, and to create a situation that meant something rather than a thing that meant something?
As a paradigm, yeah, I think so.
Because I agree with that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think that what was so strange about making an object. But it actually, back then, I would say, even though we went through all that, art is dead and painting's dead and all these different things, sculpture was still an uncomfortable word. Uncomfortable because it implied a group, an endeavor that people, they're making sculpture, he's making sculpture. And it wasn't as clear to me as a painting, because a painting is just a movable wall panel. But what's a sculpture? And by definition, a sculpture is an unnecessary object of some sort. but the word sculpture felt incredibly limiting, and yet I went right into it. And
Well, the limitation must have appealed to you in some way.
I guess. I was very uncomfortable with it when I first did it because, I'll tell you, our first teacher from Trinity College, Dieter Froge, went to my first show at John Weber in 1980, and I was very nervous about it. And he came over, and he moved heavily into conceptual video performance art. And he came over. He was from Berlin, and so I won't try to do his accent, but he more or less he said, "So, when did you start making furniture?" which was pretty good put down, I thought. But yeah, in other words, the concept of a sculpture was an uncomfortable one to embrace, even though I was in the sculpture department. But we've talked about this.
Well, it was seen,
Yeah.
sculpture at that time was a way to talk about not easily categorizable objects, I think.
And I like that, and I like that carrying on into when I was teaching. And once again, when I was teaching at Hunter, there was painting, there was sculpture, there was drawing. And sculpture was great because painting ended here, and sculpture was everything else. So I had, performance people, video. It was an exciting area. And then what they changed it to, I forget what they changed it to, but they sort of...
The fact that you can't even remember is...
Well, they took it away because they took that stuff away from the sculpture department and moved it into mixed media. And that was just, a drag for me, and I think it's...
Well, when you've got sculpture without mixed media, you don't have a whole lot, I guess.
Yeah, that's my feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, we've never been it's not a school of sculpture. People don't want to teach it, and I'm sure it's the same with you painting. Anyone teaching now, you're not teaching how to do something. In other words, if my students had started all making wood sculpture, I would have been very disappointed because I made it for my reason and my time, and it's always different. And so, yeah.
Well, the thing that could seem, this is kind of what I wanted to tease out more, is that your attraction to sculpture, whatever that ended up meaning for you, was a way to narrow your sights as an art. It was the same with me deciding to make paintings. It was considered kind of a dumb thing to do in a way, to decide I'm limiting myself to sculpture because, then you're not doing all these fabulous performances and whatever else you might have been doing. But for a young artist, that open-endedness can be horrible. It can be just a prescription to screw around and do any dumb thing. So
Yeah.
the attraction to the category, to the history, I'm stepping into the river of sculpture, there must have been something very strong about that for you.
I would have never said it that way because I understand exactly what you're saying, but I'm trying to think how I would have said it. But
You might not have even thought it,
No.
but more looking back, I guess I'm saying that, not that you knew it at the time.
Yeah.
You meant this shift to what I didn't want to lose the thought is this shift to what I called verticality or condition of being vertical. That also brings building back in. Like that.
Well, I started with building. That is so much crossover just from construction to everything else to the materials that I became familiar with. All of which I learned about in New York City. I didn't know anything about that until I started, building places, putting up walls and things. So that was a strong source of input, and sort of spun out from there. Yeah, I'm not trying. There's something you said previously that I wish I could, catch up on. But I think that it was very scary. I didn't want to acknowledge. Matter of fact. I wasn't the only one this way. Nobody wanted to say sculpture. And then you got around and said, oh, I make objects. Because sculpture did have this aura of modernism. And ARP and whoever else, classical sculpture on bases. So, yeah, I wasn't really putting myself on that
But
platform.
yeah, your choices were actually kind of perverse and radical choices in the context of what the atmosphere you were, in the context of the atmosphere you were operating in. Somebody else deciding to make wooden sculptures largely using the tools of carpeting and construction might have been making a completely different kind of choice, having to do with nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
But your work never felt like that. It had a kind of almost anti-nostalgia to it.
Well, that's good, because that's what I thought. I thought it was radical, and I've said before, but not necessarily that anyone else did, because so many people coming upon it for the first time, kind of placed it back in a whole nother era, and yet, to me, the radical thing was thinking that an object could activate the same physical, bodily, almost response that an environment could, that you could project into an object. Which, as I say, is not a problem for painting, because you can only project it to a painting, really. But an object, with all the necessities of standing, gravity, whatever, verticality. There's so many different ways you can go looking at it. But I know. You were talking about the limitations, and I could even say that I kind of know this is true, and because I watched your development, I know. When you started using the, what do you call it, the wood grain, the actual veneers.
Yeah.
Veneers, because it's very different. You have no problem with it now. But facing a blank white canvas or facing something that's already got this activity.
Yeah, 100%.
And that is very much about the way I work. That there are limitations, there are things that I have to fight against all the time or react to. So yes, and then I get so that if I'm getting specific, that I start creating the objects that then I go into and change into other objects, but there's still the idea of dealing with some sort of resistance, what you can do, what you can't do, and and my view of making art, making sculpture, why I'm sort of like a studio artist, is it's all in front of you. You don't have to go running off and order something up, or it's in front of you. You can make it. You can do it. That's a limitation that I like.
You also have managed. You put yourself in a we'll call it a dialogue with these things that you're making. It tells you something. You tell it something, and out of this comes a thing. But I think almost, like maybe literally never heard you invoke any sort of representation or sense of a subject as causing you to make a sculptural choice or decision.
Yes, correct. I don't. I can't recall doing that. I mean, I could be reacting to something I've seen or a relationship.
Have you ever changed the sculpture because it looks too much like, Abraham Lincoln? Or, I mean...
You didn't like that one?
I thought you should have left it. No, I mean, it's just an example that came to mind because of how American your work is, I think.
Okay.
But, yeah, like... I mean, you never went towards subject matter, which is an amazing thing, really. I mean, the verticalness of your work over many, many years now, I find it impossible not to cross-reference a lot with things in nature when I'm looking at them. And I never, also because I know you and I know some of your intentions, I know you're not trying to quote unquote represent nature, but you're using, 90% of, not the concrete and stuff, but your formal development has mostly happened through working on these things made of wood, cutting them up, moving them, responding to them. And they're, other than one thing, the piece out here lying on the ground that's held together with plastic ties, which is, I think, almost impossible not to look at as two women's torsos stuck together. I mean, I can't believe you can look at it without seeing that, which if you can is amazing. And if you can't, then you're doing something with that subject matter other than, foregrounding it, talking about it, letting it run your life.
Well,
so I know I'm coming from a few different places here, but I'm really curious to hear, Vertical Man talk about the degree of abstraction you managed to hold on to in a world where we're all walking around vertically.
yeah. Well, I mean, for that particular piece.
Is that a tight enough question?
That's a tight enough question, sure. I mean, to me, it's sort of like that piece come together. Is it a torso? I mean, in my mind, it's happenstance. I mean, but I see it, but in that case, unlike Abraham Lincoln, no, in that case, it was something that I was completely comfortable with. Maybe because I had my whole reasons for how I was operating. For it was actually a solution to a problem I'd been having because I'd gotten so involved with these pairs of sculptures that were relating inside outside to each other, and I thought there must be a way to put this relationship together into one piece. And the fact that it's, I can admit it's here. No, it's not a torso, but I can't admit it. But it is on the ground. It does feel, the way you described it. But the big issue for me had always been, or big question for me, is subject matter. And subject matter, which people always want to ask you about, has always been a difficult thing for me to answer because, I don't want to just do the kind of like, oh, shucks, I just made this and that's what it looks like. But it's kind of when putting together a show like this that I think that the subject matter, even not defined by me, sort of becomes more visible. And I think the subject matter is, as I hoped it would be, all internal, like all the decisions, so that each sculpture is kind of a story in itself, not another story, in itself.
I mean, not a story about something external to the sculpture.
Right. So I'd say, yeah, subject, not a narrative for something else, but something that has evolved within the making of the piece that is, to a certain degree, evident, and as is a timeline. And so each piece, you can sort of, in my mind, kind of feel the progression. And people always ask me, how did you do that? How did you, make this thing? And I get kind of trapped in that process talk because, of course, I'm very interested in it. And many times I've discovered things and done things people haven't done. But, it's the reason. What is the reason? And that's always been a tough one for me. But cumulatively, there seems to be one. It seems to, work out that, and it's really about the things themselves, the objects, their internal evolution. And I think that is, and then of course, without being the body, how it relates to the body is unavoidable. And back to your verticality. Oh, sorry, I moved the mic.
So do you have words that come to your mind when you're making adjustments with the thing you're working on, and can a thing be too stable or too unstable or too, because you're responding intuitively to something that very few people really even communicate in this language. Like, you're having a gut response to a thing you're making that you don't actually have words. They're not words. We don't generally, all of us, have a language for talking about formal choices. But do you see it as happening on that level as a kind of, I hate the word formalism, because it seems to just empty everything of meaning out of what is just a basic aspect of making art, which is, could be anything from the blue looks shitty in the upper left, put it down there, to, you know, this thing needs to bend more. But these are really difficult things to talk about without just resorting to, you know, kind of art class, blah-bitty-blah.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking, it is nonverbal stuff. And, you know, modernism is a sort of self-reflexive thing, which maybe sounds a bit like the way I'm talking, you know, but there is something different. I've always thought, and it's had a lot to do with my choice of materials, is that, you know, if a sculpture, if an object, even anything can be described in a sentence or two, you're doing something wrong, because words are kind of a drag on it, a drag on the object, a drag on perception, and lots of, you know, narrative art, that's probably the first thing out people's mouths is like, you know, what's going on, what's being said. And so I was at the same time, content, happy with what I was doing, that it didn't have any of that aspect to it, but also, you know, some consternation because people were always asking me to explain it. And I really would rather not, I guess. At least I'm happy to talk about it now, but in terms of standing in front of a work and explaining the meaning of it, that's kind of ridiculous.
It ends up being kind of an empty exercise, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like that isn't where the meaning really is.
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, I gotta get back to that. We're talking about art here, so it's not.
Well, when you're looking at something that has
Yeah.
a subject, or, you know, a painting that seems to represent some sort of narrative line, you can talk about subject matter and the story, and and kid yourself and think you're talking about the painting, when in fact you're not talking about the painting at all. And what I'm really interested in, the fact you've held to this position, I mean, not like, you know, I'm getting blown away and I have to hold on to this eroding position, but it's been your natural way to kind of stick to the objects, stay away from the narrative, find a way to be comfortable with that. And I think it's unusual, you know, and it's particularly unusual right now because so much art explanation relies on sociological exegesis that, again, seems like it's about the art, but it's not exactly. So I think your position is unusual and should be giving people a lot to think about.
Well, yeah, perhaps. I can't, you know, unusual. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I am not, you know, like a naive artist. I'm not an outsider. I'm right in the middle of things, but I've always been doing things that I can't say that I've had a group of sculptors doing what I'm doing. I mean, which I like. I mean, it's sort of individuality to some degree. But yeah, I mean.
Well, generationally, I mean, the kind of stuff we were looking at a lot when we were first being exposed to things was a highly intellectualized version of artwork, of sculpture. And your response to that is a highly intellectualized return to something that's not easy to intellectualize about. Prior to Carl Andre, there was Mark de Suvero. You know, I mean, there's certainly other artists, or Carroll was an artist that we knew about, to completely different sensibility from yours. But there were definitely older artists making capital S sculpture within an abstract idiom.
Yeah, but I think we were sort of tossing around, messing with the idea, is there a reason to make anything at all? I mean, we did come in on a you know, high conceptualism, so to speak. You know, Larry Wiener, a square cut from a carpet in use, or something like that would constitute a work of art. So it was very hard to make anything, and I tried to put it in, some sort of intellectual basis, but it was kind of a force fit. But I mean, the reason the show started at 82 is because it was at that point that I began to believe more in what I was looking at and not in the plans that were drawn up as to how to construct it. So, that was, I suppose, my biggest break from the 70s and all that kind of analysis. So-and-so does this, whatever. I mean...
You mean his analysis in hindsight, looking for historical reasons things happened? Is that what you mean?
I think justification is what I'm thinking about, and I think that was something about. I mean, I knew who my sources were, and I was always trying to tweak them and take them further or do something different. But in retrospect, I think this is a lot of what post-minimalism, if that's a thing, became, was people trying to fill in the areas between what was already very well known with something, you can lean something against the wall, or you can lay it flat on the floor, or you can just have it come up a little bit. That's different. And those are the kind of nuances that we were looking at in this very serious intellectual environment. I think, you had to justify everything somehow in your mind. And if you were in a show, you were asked to, write about your work and explain your work. Because at that time, any number of people could make the identical object for completely different reasons. And
Like the same thing, but with a different press release.
well, yeah, different press release, yeah. But I remember there's one show at the Museum of Modern Art some time ago where they kind of tried to organize things through materials, and I remember going into one area was felt, and I thought it was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen. If you could go from Boyce to Morris to Barry LeVay to other people I'm not thinking of at the moment, but felt, the concept, the material felt was not enough to hold these things together, because in fact all those artists just happened to be crossing at that juncture, and there was not a reason, a way to look at the art at all. And that's what gets me back to problems with materials alone.
There's something I'm curious about with that, and I want to ask you this, and then we want to leave time for questions. You've basically always made your work in an urban setting. You've never, you have an upstate outpost where you've done a lot of your large sculptures, but would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I would, and I think that was of interest to me, I haven't really thought about this in a while, but was the irony of working on these big fallen trees in lower Manhattan. I did not go up to, somewhere and just start working in trees amongst the trees. It was much more interesting to me to work on these natural objects in a totally artificial environment.
No pictures of shirtless Mel with the chainsaw.
There's one in the book, sort of. Yeah, not shirtless, but I did have my kid's Little League hat on, so it's still urban. Yeah.
But because it is a strong aspect walking through here, the sort of natural aspect of a lot of even the things made of the cast things made of fiberglass and stuff have a kind of organic feeling to them. They're not highly polished, highly colorful things. So, and it struck us earlier when we were looking around that, like, gosh, he's always worked in the city, mostly. So.
Yeah. Totally. I have done work. I did work out here, but it didn't relate to anything here particularly. I did the first woodblock drawings in Sag Harbor. But yeah, it is. There's something there that maybe it gave it more of a radical feeling to me. You know, you can go around and look at trees, and there's so much to see. There's so many choices. There's so many beautiful things that one could react to. But I reacted. You know, I took a truck to a tree dump in New Jersey and brought back some stuff that was about to be mulched, which created those three hollow trunk sculptures out there, and they were just set by the railroad tracks waiting for the mulcher. So I cut them up and I brought them back. So actually that was another sort of reconstituting. I was bringing some aspect of
Rescuing
yeah.
things. It's a good time to ask for questions if anyone has any.
I have a comment. Well, and I'm going to do one of those things where I'm not actually asking a question, but I do want to share. I do have to sometimes. I'm a museum director. Thank you both for being here. But
Thank you.
sometimes when I give a tour, I do have to explain. You know, I mean, what does this mean? And on many cases, I talk about the process. It's about the process and making it visible, and how every artwork has its own rules that make it unique. But there's three pieces that I liked, and I want to share with you how I explained them, because we still have time for me to course correct. If I got it wrong, I'll do the right tool for you. It's one of the pieces of wood, then the other one where you cast it in rubber, where it's a thin rubber skin where you can see it's mended on the edges. And then the molds, the sculpture that the molds that created that rubber skin that came from the other one. And so when I explain those three, I start with, this is a sculpture, it's an object, you walk around it, it's heavy, it's a vessel that's full with wood. The other one is just a skin, and the other one is the molds that make the skin that have the other space inside. So there are different versions of what is sculpture, and where you put the hierarchy of what's the space you're trying to define, moves from inside to outside of the sculpture. And then people want to wrap it up. They want an answer from his eye, and therefore, and then I say, therefore, let's move on to the next sculpture.
I think that therefore, you can let the therefore go, I think, because, I mean, everything is about questions. I cannot say why I did those things, actually. You know, it's always experimenting, but as I can look at them now, and I look at those three objects, and it's all about, you know, transformation, or viewing the object from different way, from outside, from inside, and then from further outside, which was the mold to make the rubber part. And you know, and there's a lot of that going on in the show once they start setting up the core sample, the pairs of sculptures. That there's a lot of this, you know, back and forth, or the black trunk with the woodblock, with a woodblock print on the wall taken from it. Just seems to be something, you know, that I follow, that I fall into, but I don't have any, you know, big reason for any of this. I would really say that these are just investigations that really, you know, on a basic level appeal to me. And I can give you reasons for them afterwards, but they're reasons afterwards. You know, what am I trying to do? What am I trying to show? Particularly with the rubber ones, which were just very intuitive, just strange things. But I could show the inside and the outside at the same time. So.
Would you say, I mean, I think maybe I would say that we set up these rules, like that define what I'm going to be doing with this particular thing. And then we do these things based on God knows what. And then after you see what you've made, you are then in a position to actually talk about what might really interest you. I mean, that you learn more about what might really interest you from looking at the thing you made, following all these cockamamie rules and procedures and everything that we make up for ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, that's actually something I have to get used to myself in the course of making things, is my constant disappointment with what I've done in front of me. And so often the necessity
because it doesn't meet the
Oh,
expectations
I
of?
have something in my mind I'm going for, something I've seen, something I want. I'm always trying to make something I haven't seen before, and then it's just, it just seems like a dud until, hopefully, I come in later and, and I look at it, the light's different, I'm different. I think it's mostly I'm
I
different.
was going to say, do you think a lot of it is about giving yourself a break?
Yeah, I'm very hard on myself when I'm
I
actually.
mean, like letting up on your own expectations of yourself?
That's, yeah, but yeah.
Just curious.
But did
I don't mean that you have this as a problem. I meant we collectively,
Yes.
artist people, tend to be really hard on ourselves when we're confronted with something we made that we don't know how to feel about.
Yeah, definitely.
And then when a little bit of time passes, things go downstream a bit, you think, oh, okay. Well, it's not what I thought it wasn't. It's this,
Right, and in the big context of the whole show, I'd see something and go, well, why didn't I zero in on that? Why didn't I pay more attention to that? And the fact is that I didn't totally believe in it at the time.
Right.
And that's a hard thing to give yourself permission. The interesting thing is maybe when you're away from it, you begin to be able to look at it as though someone else made it. Because you kind of forget all that, how personal it is when you're working on all those, little decisions that, maybe they're out the window a little, and you can just look at it. But I find that very hard at the time. And of course, as many people feel this way, if you immediately think, wow, that's great, chances are it's not. It's kind of the peculiar things that stay with you. Yes.
I love your furniture, and especially the Abe Lincoln piece. My question about naming, assigning names. If your work's happenstance and it's not representational, at what point do you give it a name, and what sort of thought goes into how you name the pieces?
Well, I'm not sure if you noticed, but most everything's untitled. And that follows that exactly. And part of the very conscious reason of it, because I saw how Carroll did it, how Chamberlain did it, how different people, is that if you name an abstract sculpture, you're directing someone immediately into something like, and I can't come up with anything off the top of my head, and that is something that I really didn't want to do. On the other hand, I think that my problem, my not naming, is ultimately very not a good idea. It's a bad idea because you start making more things and you kind of go, oh, that's whatever is walnut with holes. Well, okay, how many walnut with holes are there? So in the realm of naming, I actually think Frank Stella hit upon it because he came up with classifications. Because you can go through the show and you can sort of see, if you break down my work, that there are groups that could be classified, that could be a basis for naming, but that's really just identifying them, and you don't want to do something that's going to go, take you somewhere too specific. Or I don't. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could say something about at what point or how you choose to introduce or use color in your sculpture.
Yeah, well, given the whole construction basis, color was very far from the way I started in on sculpture, black, white, wood. And color came specifically, in my mind, mostly about creating or emphasizing the outside and inside of something. And when I began working in the 80s with, making a block, not just picking up a piece of limb or tree from a wood that had bark, I would then begin to, I'd put color on it. And as I've often said, the colors I use are probably very associative for me in childhood or something. I don't know why I chose them, but it's really, they're out of the can. I don't mix them, so I'm not a colorist, but I think of them as a material. Color, paint is a material. Paint is putting another surface on something, and I want that surface to be different than the interior. So you know.
I would just add that I wonder, because in looking at much of the sculpture, the color application seems almost to be a wash, which hints at a surface or says, look here, rather than covers it.
Yeah, well, it changes a little. I mean, the big red, yellow, blue piece in there was color was part of the process, which everything does come back to process, but process hopefully sort of disappears, and that was simply a coding method for me to enlarge that piece to make a much bigger sculpture, and I broke it into quadrants of color. But it's other than that, it's really the colors about the outer surface of the initial object. More, yeah.
So, in all the years of knowing one another, did the two of you ever collaborate or sit together and was like, you know, wouldn't it be nice if this was
don't think we-
in your place?
I don't think so.
No, I can't.
Collaborated on social events and things like that. No, I don't think we ever collaborated on any art.
Interesting question. I mean, I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know what.
No. Hi, April.
I'm going to try to make myself heard. When I was looking at your show, I just was so profoundly struck by the intelligence and the animism of it. I don't know if that's a word that would make you recoil because of your strict conceptual past, but I think you both share a very sophisticated, very a certain kind of high irony about life and art and how you express yourself in it. There's a kind of, maybe a potential protective concealment of feelings or whatever, that could be seen as clearly overstated. But I think that your work has the most amazing kind of, from, as you sort of humorously put it, ruining something and then resurrecting. I mean, the way that you reanimate something once you've worked on it has such an incredible, powerful, smart, and really suggestive, like, invitation to a viewer to meet it and know it in a certain way. Like, you're meeting something you've never met before, but it contains this love that I think is really remarkable. And I just wanted to find out if that makes you authentic. But I think it's a wonderful power that actually you both share in your work.
Maybe as too glib or something, but part of the reason, I don't know. I mean, I like what you're saying. I'm interested in that. But I mean, part of this titling of the show that just came out at one point was that what happens when you see something abstract? In my case, and Tip's case, it would seem less abstract, but I know how abstract he really is. How structured, these paintings are. But I feel that there's something you have to feel. There's something emotional. There's something that draws you to, an abstract work of any sort, and you don't necessarily, it's like some familiarity with one aspect of it. I'm just not sure. I mean, why do you meet some people and like them immediately or hate them immediately? There's, so there is some very emotional thing going on there in looking at, thinking about abstract art or objects. I mean, I don't know, that's maybe not really what you're saying, but I'm interested in that.
It's not animism in the sense of it being animated and there being a kind of a humor about it, but I think in even the very dark pieces that you make, and there are some that are really, really dark, and then in the ones that kind of have this playfulness, there's an edge at which irony and life meet death and vulnerability, and it's all very, very, very abstracted, but I think it's what gives it its essential power. But I viscerally, I feel it when I look at your work. So I'm just curious.
No, I mean, I mean, I like that. I can't take credit. I can't think that I'm thinking that way. Okay, I can take credit that I made it. I think that has something to do with I mean, how can an object be humorous if it's not a joke? I don't know. These are all, it brings up a lot of different things.
That's the magic.
Yeah.
But all those things that you're saying about what it's like to deal with the thing, I feel them too. And I think in Mel's case, because he is really showing up, like really showing up when you make these things. And you feel that, you know, they feel like there's some sort of life force, some sort of animating principle, something that they're not inert things. I tend to feel that way about any sculpture that intrigues me, but a lot of the time those are things that are, you know, that are figures, that are statues, they're not abstraction of anything like the kind you're doing. So it's unusual to have that feeling there. I don't know exactly what April means, but that's what I was thinking about when she was talking.
Who's calling?
Judy and Eric are both calling.
Judy first.
Well, I was thinking, I love what April is sort of saying, it has a human quality maybe, but I also think, you know, it's like Mel making his own nature. You make these wonderful, surprising objects, and it's like you've made your own nature. But I also see the other side too, since you are using natural things, there is sort of an Emersonian mystical element as well. But I guess I see both things.
Mel could have made a lot of hay out of that if he were a different kind of person. I mean, because I've thought about all that Emersonian American thinking about, I mean, it's all in Mel's work.
Yeah.
But
But then he is doing another thing too,
yeah,
where he's making these objects that are completely eccentric and they're very much his own. And you go, what? But it just works. And it's like he made something that would, like, your own nature.
Well, I like hearing these things.
so Eric, do you still have a question?
I do, yeah. It was based on something that you said earlier, Tiff, about you both being in high school art classes and stuff, and you know, kind of, you know, wondering about whether that was the point at which your commitment to a life of art came from. And it made me think about the difference between the excitement, enthusiasm one has as just learning how to be creative, and you know, sort of the excitement of the new. If you saw the work that you made, that you're making now, then, and this is for both of you, would you have the same degree of enthusiasm about it, or would you be disappointed at what you saw? I mean, I say that not because your work is disappointing. I mean, I wasn't the one that said that. No, but in terms of having one idea of what art is, only to live a creative life in which you create the thing that is your art, and whether that moment of confrontation with your skills and your vision and your limitations and stuff would be from a young point a disappointing one, and you go, fuck, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do something else.
Honestly, I think I can't answer your question exactly, but I don't even think, I I was so far from imagining that you could even choose to be an artist, much less, like, I don't think that idea emerged fully clear to me until I was 25. So I don't know what I would have thought. I think what I would have thought is that somebody that can do that for their whole life and they're in their 70s and they're still walking around and doing that, that's kind of crazy. I can't imagine that. And that's all I know, that I think I would have been astonished, the young me, that we're still here doing this, that I mean, I can't speak to the things themselves that I've made, but just the fact that they exist and that one keeps going is not a thought you can really, I could not have imagined that when I was young. So I think that would be the thing that would by far, override any other reaction I would have.
Well, definitely agree with that. But I was, not. You said something, Pat, about the excitement of when you first are discovering this way of being, this way of thinking, the idea of being an artist, and it could have been, music. It could have been anything. That was something that I think happened with, which doesn't actually have much to do with the objects. That all came later, but I think the idea is following the interest, what we were thinking about, led into this. So I think that there was the excitement that we were not buried in whatever, I don't know what classes we might take, but that this was possible.
Pre-law, I don't.
Pre-law,
who knows?
right. I dropped out pre-med, and then whatever. It was just, that was an incredible concept of freedom that I didn't expect, and somehow we're here today. So.
There's someone whose arm has been up back there for a long time. I think that's, yeah.
How has this whole, besides the time of having these two retrospectives on your daily life, I don't know how that's been affecting you, but more importantly, like seeing it all. When you saw it all once in Massachusetts and you see it here, how does that affect what you do now when you go back to your studio? Is it sort of all the background, or is it seeing all of this? We don't all get to have retrospectives.
No.
But how does that affect you?
Well, yeah, put everything in the foreground. A lot of these things, a lot of these big things I make, I hadn't seen in that time. I'm not sure I can distinguish between the two shows, but there's new work in this show that wasn't in the other show, so I'm still working and I'm responding to something, and often it's a dialogue with my own work. I'm very self-centered here, so I don't, it's seeing it all has definitely affected me, but I also can look at things and go, well, yes, but either how did I do that? I don't remember doing that, or I'm not interested in doing that again. Those are also emotions that come out of this, so it's not clear, what I'm using.
And I want to know what your favorite tools are.
Okay, yeah, I've tried my whole career, tried to get away from the how do you do it thing, because that's divergent. Yeah, I know how to make things. I learned how to make things, and that's what I'm making.
One more over here.
I just sort of have a comment, and it wouldn't necessarily relate to all of the pieces, but I was so moved to really moved to see how the interior, the identical interior of the piece that was so sort of gnarly and rough and life-worn on the outside could be so soft and just gentle and innocent on the inside. And I was just wondering if that was ever a metaphor for you that you also felt as that inner came out.
I don't know if I've felt that. I mean, I think more mechanically, ectoskeletons, or I don't know. I mean, how things are hold together. I don't know which part's soft, which part's harder, but there is definitely, certainly in the twin pieces, there's something to compare, and they have very different emotional takes on them.
Is that a question, or are we?
It is a question.
Oh.
Yes, you have been friends for so long, and you're very different in your art making, and just wondering, do you have these kind of conversations with each other, and are you honest? Do you give honest opinions and feedback? And is that enhancing your friendship, or is it detrimental to your? I mean, I'm just wondering how art plays a role in your friendship.
Well, we've been interested in it almost as long as we've been friends, in one way or another. Wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been a theme. So yes, do we talk to each other? Yes. Do we talk to each other? I mean, we really used to talk to each other a lot, and now, of course, not so much. But it's it's just like any old friend you get together. There's a lot to.
Yeah, and like any artist here know, the people that you're in school with, that you gravitate to when you're young, you have a lot of time for those people, and time with those people. It's extremely formative. And then, as your life becomes more itself, you have a partner, you have children, you have whatever you have, or a career for that matter, I guess. That takes up more time. And it has to take time for it to be done well. So friendship like what Mel's and my friendship now is very different structurally than it was when we were 20, 25. But the fact that we had those experiences means we sort of can always pick up. And we do go to each other's studios. We still do that.
And we are honest, yes.
That's like the weirdest thing to wonder about. Like, am I honest? Is he honest? I wish you'd never asked us that question.
No, I think it's good. I think we're good.
I don't see any more. Oh, now I do. Okay. You're the last question.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for bringing your work to us. Exquisite show. I was curious about the printmaking. There's some beautiful prints, and there's one very large piece that's in the same room with the horizontal sculpture. And how, or at what point did you work with the printmaking was it, I guess there are several questions here, but was it a conversation you were having printmaking for the sculpture, or was it just taking a break from the sculpture to do the
I think it was taking a break, but it's viewed as they're parallel structures. There's a little book here about the wood blocks, and you see that on the cover I'm making the exact one that's on the wall, and in the background are the exact sculptures, those black oil sculptures. So this was all the same way of working, and I was just trying to apply it to 2 dimensions and see what happened, and a lot happened. Primarily, you put something in 2 dimensions, illusion comes in. When you're making an object, it's that. It's physical, that's all you got. But if you do something on a plane, it becomes more of a window. So that was really interesting to me, that working the same way, I could find that. But yeah, same time.